second most popular trend in smart cities, that's everything about data. Data management, data integration, open data. All these areas, they bring us to the first topic, which will say how, from which, and practically why we should take care about data. Why comparing to mobility, comparing to environmental friendly, why in there we think about data. The biggest challenge these days in the cities is that they are divided into silo approach. We have department which is responsible for roads and they take care of roads, as the name says. We have the department which is responsible for environmental protection and they are experts in environmental protection. But practically, when we build roads, they strongly influence, for example, on air pollution or noise pollution. So while doing and while managing them, we should combine one with another. These days in cities, it's not that obvious. I mean, one of my favorite cases is one of the cities in southern Poland. They reorganized the school system. In Poland, the schools, they start a school year on 1st September. And on 1st September, after this reorganization, the department which was responsible for transportation in the city, they were surprised that there are some unexpected changes. Because some of the buses, which normally tends to be full, they were half empty. Whereas the other ones, in the places in which normally at, for example, 9 a.m., there were nearly no people in there. They were as full so that not everyone can jump inside. Same happened with congestion on the roads. And the fact that in some places we had traffic jam and normally never appeared before. They had absolutely no idea what happened, so what they did, they hired a consultant company which made the research and said, hey, these are the changes just implemented by another department of your city hall. And of course you might think that that's ridiculous. And it means that they have absolutely no idea what's happened in their place. But you have to remember that the city hall by itself is so full of data that it's hard to compare it with any other institution. Just to illustrate it, how challenging it is, when we compare banking business with the city halls, when two banks merge, you have to merge two IT systems. That's a long process, which is normally planned a year and a half in advance. Just to illustrate it, how does it work in the city halls? In one of the cities in Poland, mid-sized city, I mean big comparing to the definition because it's 600,000 inhabitants. They have right now 220 different IT systems, up from which 20% are the systems which are delivered by the company that does not exist anymore. Another 18 to 20% are the systems that has the owner, but they don't update the systems anymore. What's the challenge in here? Well, the systems which were taken from the companies that do not exist anymore. First of all, someone bought the rights to the system, so you cannot change them without paying the fees. Second, it practically just means that if they are on, you don't touch them. No one thinks even about merging them with something else. That illustrates how complicated environment we have in there. How complicated that environment might be, thinking about planning and the number of data sets that you have in there. We think about thousands of different data sets. When we made the research investigating the big city halls, around 20% of the data which is stored in the city halls, it's still in the paper version. We're thinking about exchanging that data, making some changes, if they are still the paper version. Next 15 to 20%, depending on the city hall, is in the documents like PDF or the pictures, which also means, yes, they are electronic, but we're not even talking about autonomous machines using them. But even in here, it's hard just to take the data from the inside. That's not the illustration that should tell you, hey, the story is bad. But it just practically says that's the topic, which is quite complicated and because of that challenging. But without making the changes inside of the institution, organizing the data, merging that, building the plan, it's hard to make any other changes which are seen directly by the city inhabitants, like mobility, like environmental protection, because all of them, they're using that data. To make it effective, you have to precisely define the processes, define the data sets, and build a strategy for that. How complicated is that? And how does it work? We can see it with another attempt. What's the amount of data that we should think about? Well, take a look on what you can have in your illustration. That presents you how on average 60 seconds in the internet does look like. What is happening in just 60 seconds on average in the world? And you can see more than 5 million messages sent on WhatsApp every day. You can see how many number of Skype calls you have in there, Tinder clicks, messages liked, and emoji icons which are sent in there. I'm presenting that just to illustrate you how much data we generate every day. Someone is interested, once a year that kind of data is published just to illustrate you how fast the data sets are growing. That's important because still the biggest source of data, the biggest organization with the biggest source of data worldwide, they're called the city halls. Even though we think that it will be the big tech, so Alphabet, Meta, but still these are the city halls, and that presents the challenges that we have with them. What else we can do with the data? My favorite part, and I think the one in which we have the biggest value, it's everything about the open data. What is open data? Open data means this is a type of the data which can be freely used by anyone for any purposes that you need in all possible perspectives. Practically, it just means that the cities does not need to provide all the services by themselves. It can be done in the way, just to illustrate you that if you have the data about transportation system in the city, there is absolutely no need to create a dedicated application for that. I remember that a few years ago, here in the city of Gdańsk, there was a dedicated application created for the city hall just to plan all the transportation system. So if you were looking for the way how to move from place X to place Y, it was your choice to use it. Practically, very few people use it. It was not most user-friendly, and it was pretty expensive because the city and the project in which it was, they had to pay for that more than 2.5 million euro just for having that. What can you do instead of that? Right now, the city, when they have all the data about live location of every single bus and tram because of the GPS signal, and they have the live location of all the bus stops and tram stops, they can just give the data for free, actualized every time period which is defined in there, and here every 5 seconds. And it can be used by any entity that would like to do it for any purpose that they think is important. So right now, you can find the data in Google Maps, but you can also find it in 3-4 other local applications. What does it mean? City does not have to provide a dedicated application and does not have to pay for that. And as a reason, we, the customers, we can get much better product, thinking from the quality perspective, because we can choose from, in this place, 4 different applications, and we can select the one which we like the most. And finally, it brings the possibilities, like the one that the data might be used for the purposes that we would never think about. Transportation data, what do we use it for? For transport, right? But we have few companies, one of them in southern Poland, which is, for example, using live transportation data for fast food delivery. If you have a stop in the main train station in there and you have 5 minutes stop in there, you might be sure that they will deliver you food in there on time because they know when you're delayed, what time precisely you will appear and which platform. And it appears that you might have absolutely new business models and new kind of services that without that will never appear, which is stimulating the business development. Many cities, especially in the US, they publish the data which is presenting how many businesses and the worth of those businesses were created just basing on the fact that the city decided to open the data that they currently have. So what are the benefits of the open data? First, it helps you in participation government. So it might work in the way that it's not only the city who's opening the data, but the city might give you the platform and just welcome the city inhabitants to put the data in there. One of the most popular trends, one of the most popular example in here, well, we had the applications which help to put all the information about the trees that we have in the city. So the city provides you the application, and then the city inhabitants, while they walk, they just put the picture of the tree. They measure the tree. They put the information about what's the current condition of the tree, and they do it because they like to do that, because these trees are important for them. So, and for the other side, you have very up-to-date information about, at first some stage, finally, all or nearly all trees in your city. Benefits? You have the city inhabitants who would like to participate in the process, and you have huge cost savings. Beside of that, it helps also with transparency. I mean, staying with the example of the city of Gdańsk, they publish all the invoices paid the day before. So it practically means that if you're interested what they spend the money on, you can log on the web page and you can see the invoices which were paid. First, super hard to convince the people to be that open and that transparent. But then after some time, it just makes it easier. If everyone thinks that you spend the money logically, there's an easy answer. Take a look. I mean, all the data, all the invoices are in there. Feel free to do that. Transparency in this public sector is super, super important. What else about that? I mean, if it has so many advantages, the question is, why still minority of the cities opens the big amounts of the data? And in here, we have few key problems. First one, it's everything about privacy. And the fact that we're thinking how much and which type of data we can publish. We can easily publish the data about how many cars and how many people are moving on every single street. But if it happens that there's only one house on that street and nothing else, you should remember that that's a perfect illustration of how and when the people from or out of this house are walking, and you should think which data should be anonymized and in which way. Does it mean that's a huge problem? No, it's not. And we have lots of examples how to do that. But it's always the first source and the first argument, which is giving like, we should be careful, maybe better not to do that. Second argument, it's everything about law regulations. The problem in here is that you can publish the data that you own. Does it mean that if you have the IT system, you own the data from that system? Not really. We have very many examples of especially intelligent transportation systems that costed millions, in many cases hundreds of millions of euro, in which the city bought the system, but they don't own the data. My favorite case in one of the cities, in that system you have lots of information about number of cars, number of pedestrians, number of bicycles. But if any person from another department wanted to use them, or if there was a case, let's open the data for anyone who would like to use it, the company that delivered the data said, that's cool, you should just pay us for that, because it's an extra service. We don't have that in agreement. And especially all the contracts with IT companies delivering that kind of software signed before 2011, 2010, they did not have this note about open data because no one really that was thinking about it. Does it mean it's impossible to do that? Of course it's not. I mean, first of all, you can import the data not directly, and then without breaking the law regulations, you can get the data. Second, it's always business negotiations, and the question is what's the cost and what can you offer instead of paying money directly. We have lots of examples that could be used in there, so it shouldn't be the argument, no, we cannot do that. The third one, that's everything about the version in which you have your data. As I've said a few minutes ago, if you have the data which is in paper version, or the data which is in, for example, PDF, you cannot just open the data because it's not the data that can be automatically in the certain time sequences given for anyone for free to use, reuse. So you have to plan the whole process, not only to digitalize the data, but to think to which level that data should be digitalized, that they can be read and used in, for example, M2M method, machine to machine, without the human being in there, which helps to make all automatic decisions. But by doing that, you have to reach the certain standard. And finally, there's a case of business model. And in here, you might be surprised, like open data for free to anyone to reuse or use. Where's the business in here? Well, we have the companies, which tends to come especially to the city halls and says, we would like to get that and that data set and that format updated, for example, every single second. If it's dedicated format for one company, it's not an open data, but they claim it is. And then there is a question, what will happen if we will not give you the data? But there's also the question how we can negotiate it. For example, if someone is asking about the data about public transportation, for example, localization of the buses, you can try to exchange the data. Try to get the data about pedestrians, and because of that, give the data based on the traffic of the buses or trams. But if that one doesn't work, you have to think what's the value of the data. And here we have a few different business models, but you should be aware that everything that was just claimed in here, it's not an open data, but it's still the system in which we think how and in which way to exchange the data. Summing up, open data, I would say great, more and more appearing trend. And these days, not only the open data in which you had the data given from the public sector, public administration, but more and more often we have the data which is given by citizens and used, for example, by the city hall. I'm the member of NGO in here, which is Gdańska Urban Development Association, and we did the project in which we collect the information about air pollution. And normally you have in here 6 stations which are owned by the public sector. Very expensive to install every single of them. But still the number of them is, there's not enough of them. And their location, they're not located, for example, in the places in which the biggest number of people live right now. For the other side, we have the people, individuals, who are buying from their own budget detectors. And they pay monthly or yearly fee just to make it possible and to get the information about what's the air pollution in their neighborhood. The number of people using the systems like that is big. We have more than hundreds of them. So there was the idea how to use the data from the different systems, integrate them, and basing on them make the decision. The detectors bought by these individuals, the quality of the measurement is not good enough to be formally appointed. But you can, basing on that, build the model, and because of the number of them, big number of them, basing on them still make the prognosis. So that's exactly what we did. Build a map, integrated all of them. Basing on that, the city hall can make the decisions, better decisions. They don't need to install their own very expensive, formally agreed stations, and it also brings to the citizens who bought that kind of detectors, they can get a better prognosis for themselves. They're included in all this process. And finally, they just have the better information. And that's the power of what the open data is. Besides the open data, we can talk about two other things that are worth mentioning. First, it's everything about big data. So the data that is too big or too complex to be analyzed by the human being. So in here, we talk about big data sets, which are used to be exchanged between the machines, different type of examples. For example, the data which is collected from the streets, which is measuring the number of cars which are passing on that street every second or every 2 seconds. The number of data is extremely big, and it's needed to put this data together and basing on that data make automatic decisions. So that kind of data sets are super important, but in there are key factors that we should take into consideration. It's not just about the size of that data and number of that data, but we should have in our mind that we have to provide that this data is origin, that we have to provide this data as authentic, to be sure that automatic decisions which are made basing on them would be the correct ones. We have some examples, luckily mostly in the private sector, that for example, automatic fridges which were bought, the ones that can detect what you have inside, if something is missing, they can place the order and the things will be delivered to your house. We had the example in which the fridge made the incorrect verification, and one of the houses was, they ordered half ton of butter, which was delivered in there and has to be paid for that. Of course, we can say that's funny in that case, but try to imagine the same thing will happen if you're, for example, managing traffic lights in the city, and in all of them, in one time you'll put the red light, and you can stop all the city in like 1 minute. That's the power of big data. For a second, that's just a real life. We have more and more data, and it's nothing that we can be aware or not. That's something that we should be prepared for, and that's the most important case in here. And the last one that I would like to mention in here is everything about IoT, Internet of Things. So there's machines which are collecting the data. We used to have internet, so humans to humans communicating. IoT, that's machine to machine communication. You should be aware that in this IoT, the machines communicate with each other. They collect the data, they exchange the data, which is fine, but you should be aware of the number of them. We have these days our smartwatches, fridges, or we have all the detectors in the hospital, which are exchanging information between each other. Basing on that, they make the decision. 5, 6 of them. On average, in some American houses right now, you have more than 80 different machines communicating to each other, which requires proper standards, which requires enough electricity, which requires enough place to send the data, like the network that you will use in there. All the environment in there is just super important to provide that this decision will be correctly and they might be used practically. The two ones that I super shortly presented in the last 5 minutes, they're like the essence of the modern cities that we have these days. They present us from where we generate majority of the data. According to statistics, 90% of the data that we have right now was produced in the last 2 years, which first of all present the scale of the data that we produce and how much more every year we produce. But also brings us some benefits. It means that if we will start making the changes, for example, plan the process of generating the data, plan all the whole process of digitalizing the city hall, it will help us with majority of the data that we'll have in a year or two. And that plan and the idea how to manage the whole process in here is crucial. Doesn't mean we don't have to take care about the data that we have from the past. We will still have. But it's just to illustrate you the scale of what we are going to deal with and how much of them we will have in the future. To make it possible to work effectively, with any type of the decisions in the city, we want them to be based on the data, not based on beliefs, on habits, or on good practices. And the more we can base with our decisions in the city on data, the better these decisions will be. But to do that, we have to prepare all the background. Procedures, integration, standards, exactly the things that we've just mentioned. When we do that, and that things will be done, or at least planned, all the other decisions in smart cities will be just more effective.